It's all about the budget tonight, and Treasurer Jim Chalmers says he is very proud of the budget that will be presented tonight. He says it will show the biggest budget turnaround on record.
I'm really proud of this budget that I'll be handing down tonight. I'm really proud of the collective effort that's gone into it.
Well, we haven't seen all of the budget, though there has been a lot of it leaked ahead of time. But a budget surplus would indeed represent a turnaround, and it's something that Australians should be proud of, even if the praise shouldn't necessarily be given to Dr. Chalmers. Australia's recovery from the pandemic really has been remarkable, but it wasn't by accident. It was the product of Australians and their hard work and tenacity, often despite heavy-handed state government measures that seemed determined to shut them down and lock them in their homes. And even if it was not perfect, the Morrison government put in place the policies that were needed to lay the foundation for this turnaround. You don't have to go back too far to remember that JobKeeper supported 4 million people being kept on the books of over 1 million businesses, avoiding joining the unemployment queues en masse and making a fast bounce back of the economy a reality. The cash flow boost was a lifeline to over 800,000 businesses, most of them in the small to medium size bracket. The instant asset write-off meant businesses had the confidence to invest in the technology and tools that were needed to improve their productivity. And in doing so, they were able to buy from and support suppliers and retailers and, of course, their employees. 50% wage subsidies for apprentices saw a huge boost to skills and the confidence for small trade-based businesses to grow when other economies were having a crisis of confidence. If you think the skills shortage is bad now, can you imagine what it would have been like without the Coalition's massive investment in apprentices and training? These economic policies set up during the Coalition's time are the reason why we have seen such a significant budget turnaround. In fact, the December 2021 national accounts showed Australia's economy grew 3.4% since the pandemic. Now, to put that in perspective, it is more than the USA, the UK, Canada, Germany, Japan, Italy and France. It's a result that is absolutely top of the class for the developed economies. And that's before Labor had a chance to go anywhere near the budget. So yes, this is a big budget turnaround, both because a lot of this country's buffer, its rainy day money, was spent during the pandemic. That's why it's so important to show restraint when times are good. That's what gives a nation the room to act decisively when it's needed. But it's also because that money was spent quite wisely on measures that were short-term, focused on putting this nation on the best possible position to be able to bounce back. The Treasurer says he understands that Australians are, to use his words, under the pump right now.
It's carefully calibrated to address cost of living pressures in our communities rather than add to them. It's a budget in Labor's best traditions, but also Australia's best traditions. Help for the vulnerable, broadening and extending more opportunities and investing in the future of our country and its people.
If he really understands how much Australians are struggling, he won't squander the budget position he now has in his hands due to the hard work and the resilience of Australians, as well as the efforts of the Coalition to put this nation in a position where it was well placed to recover from the pandemic. We will see when he delivers his budget speech tonight. But I've got to say, the early signs aren't good. He's announced higher taxes that disincentivise investment in our energy industry, when investment is what we need to get energy bills down for the long term. He's promised a sugar hit of one-off payments as help for the high cost of living for those doing it tough. But even a high school economics student understands that cash handouts make inflation worse and raise the cost of everything for everyone. He's promised permanent indexed growth in the cost of government grants, a structural change that makes it harder to get the balance back in the budget year after year after year. And in a similar vein, he's upping welfare payments, a structural and permanent expansion of the budget. You've got to wonder why he's prioritised making life easier on welfare when there are over 430,000 jobs on offer in Australia right now. It's a record. Now, more than ever, anyone who wants a job in this country can get one. Now, it can be hard to make ends meet on welfare, no doubt. But without sounding harsh here, it's not meant to be comfortable or desirable to be on welfare. It's just meant to tide you over until you're back in work, ASAP. If you get the balance wrong, that incentive shifts from going to work to taking it easy. But don't underestimate the Labor spin machine. It has been in overdrive, so much that even their ABC has had to call it out. Jim Chalmers said that the coalition racked up all but a tiny fraction of this nation's debt.
But the fastest growing cost in the Commonwealth budget is the interest costs on the $1 trillion in Liberal debt that we inherited from our predecessors.
Wrong. When the coalition left office in March 2022, Labor was left with $888 billion of gross debt, or $517 billion of net debt being the more meaningful measure. It's a lot. But while most of that debt was accrued during the coalition's term, a sizable chunk was inherited from the previous Labor government. Labor's share amounted to 31% of net debt, amounting to $161 billion. Hardly tiny, enough for him to get a slap on the wrist from the ABC and the RMIT fact-checkers. Experts consulted by Fact Check reiterated that debt wasn't necessarily a bad thing and that debt levels needed to be viewed in context. Importantly, they said, that means considering what the debt was used for, which in the coalition's case included keeping the economy afloat during the critical stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. And while no debt is obviously better than having debt, even the fact-check experts were quick to point out that the debt the coalition incurred needs to be understood in its context. And the fact of it being used to help get us through the pandemic in a way that was time-limited, targeted and effective had to be acknowledged. But Dr. Chalmers isn't letting that get in the way of a good story. You might similarly remember that Finance Minister Katy Gallagher said that she inherited the worst set of books in budget history.
We've inherited the worst set of budget books.
Again, even the ABC's fact-checkers, who are usually so keen to give Labor a free kick, couldn't give that fib the tick. They said Senator Gallagher's claim is wrong. On two key economic indicators, debt and deficit, previous incoming governments have inherited worse budget books. The only fair way to make historical comparisons is to take into account the size of the economy and measure the indicators as a proportion of GDP. On this basis, gross debt levels were historically much higher for previous incoming administrations than the figure faced by the new Labor government. And similarly, the deficit as a percentage of GDP is not the worst on record. So it's not exaggerated, not spin affected by their measure, just plain wrong. One would have hoped that our nation's finance minister would know a thing or two about these numbers. So either Senator Gallagher isn't across her brief or she's deliberately fudging the facts. I don't know which one's worse. So let's get real about what Labor were working with. They were left with more people in employment than there were in employment pre-COVID, an achievement no other major advanced economy could match. In April 2022, unemployment fell to 3.9%, the lowest level in 48 years, considerably lower than the 5.7% rate left by Labor in 2013. Remember, at the start of the pandemic, the most credible prediction was that Australia's unemployment was likely to reach 15%. That would have been a disaster. the Coalition's targeted measures completely avoided that horror outcome. Under the Coalition, the rate of welfare dependency in this country fell to the lowest level in 30 years, from 16.5% under Labor in June 2013 to 13.5% in June 2019. Even after COVID at June 2021, welfare dependency was at 15.6%, lower than under Labor. So don't fall for Labor's revisionism tonight. They'll be spinning it harder than the cha-cha at the Ekka. In 2018 to 19, the budget returned to balance for the first time in 11 years, finally overcoming Rudd and Gillard's baked-in spending. The last Coalition budget in 2022 saw the largest improvement in Australia's finances in over 70 years. Australia has remained one of just 9 countries to hold a AAA credit rating from the 3 leading credit agencies. The budget was predicted to be over $103 billion better off over 5 years compared to the previous mid-year projections. And the Coalition did it all while rewarding your hard work by reducing taxes for more than 11 million Australians. Tonight's surplus is good news, and it's achieved because Australia entered the COVID-19 pandemic in a position of strength. Strength the Morrison-Frydenberg government secured and then deployed in our nation's hour of need. And it was secured by the sheer tenacity of Australians who didn't give up during what was a shocker of a time.